just adding an extra thing to my bio, my history, that my mother told me that when I was born, I came out of her womb bald, without any hair. That must have been a sign. So today's talk is going to be on how to live without fear. And can everyone hear at the back there? Those people who are at the back, there's lots of nice seats at the front here. So you don't need to be afraid of sitting in the front. This is how to live without fear. So you can all sit in the front if you want to. The best seats in the house are now open for you. Living without fear, there's too many people afraid in our world. Because they're afraid, it means that they can't enjoy their life, they can't enjoy the present moment. And also the fear paralyzes us. It means we can't be successful in life, we can't have happiness. And as a monk, I know that I have to face fear many, many times. They say the most fearsome thing you can do is to speak in public, and I do that every day. And I'll let you into a secret. Whenever I get up here, I haven't got a clue what I'm going to say next. I make it up as I go along. And it's amazing that as a monk, what you can get away with. That recently somebody came to see me in my monastery in Perth, and they reminded me that some 2 or 3 years earlier, I was involved in a transport summit with the government of Western Australia, talking about trucks and transport issues. I don't know how I got involved in that, but I get involved in all sorts of things. But during the interval, one of the members of this conference interviewed me about shipping. I don't know anything about shipping, but I was willing to say something about it. Often I speak about things I don't know anything about, but at that time, they recorded the interview and they published it in the local magazine, and it was so popular, so he told me 2 weeks ago, it was reprinted in great shipping magazines all over the world under the title Zen and the Art of Shipping. And he came to tell me that one of his best friends, who was an expert in his field, praised me for my knowledge about shipping, saying that monk really knows what he was talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about. But nevertheless, I got away with it again. So whatever happens in your life, if you don't have fear, you enjoy yourself, then your mind is free, your mind is relaxed, and you find no matter what you do, you will always be successful. So we're talking here about how to be successful without fear coming up into your life. But I have to make a distinction here between fear and foolishness. Because sometimes people, they don't show any fear, but it's just because they're quite stupid. That happened to me once, when I was only about 6 years as a monk in Thailand. This was more, maybe, 24 years ago, 1980. I was traveling in a bus in the northeast. Now at that time, because many of those buses were very old and they weren't well maintained, many of those buses actually caught fire in the middle of their journeys. And there was a whole number of buses were destroyed. One of my monks in the monastery, a fellow monk, had lost all his possessions because they were underneath in this bus. He had to rush out, and before he could even collect his bowl and his bag, they were all destroyed. And some people were killed as well in these bus fires. Now the point was that I didn't watch the television, I didn't listen to the radio, and I couldn't understand the newspapers, so I didn't know. But I was on a bus one day and smoke started coming from the back. And everybody screamed at the driver, "Stop, stop!" And the driver put his foot down so hard on the brake, the bus screamed to a halt. I was sitting next to a monk in the front seat. As everybody raced to get out, so did he. He didn't wait to be last out or first out. The driver, he just jumped out of the window. And there's so many racing to get out, I didn't know what was going on. So I just sat there as everybody streamed out. One man stayed behind and found it was only a cigarette butt at the back. That was all it was, and he very quickly extinguished the smoke. But because I sat there, basically because I was stupid, I didn't know what was going on, when people came back into the bus afterwards, they were bowing to me, and they were saying, what a great monk you are, how brave you are, it's nice to see monks who aren't afraid, not like that other monk sitting next to you. I felt so good. But the point was, I was stupid. That wasn't fearlessness, that was just being stupid. Because there are some things you should be afraid of. I said this morning at Dana that about being afraid of snakes, because certainly in Thailand and in Singapore there's so many snakes. When I first went to Thailand, I was warned about the danger of snakes. They told me there's 100 species of snake in Thailand. 99 are venomous. If they bite you, you'll either die or you'll get very sick. The other one strangles you to death. They're all dangerous. But sometimes it wasn't fearlessness, it was stupidity. I remember once getting up early in the morning. Actually, I hadn't been to sleep at all. I was meditating all night. When I got up in the morning to urinate in the bush, I thought I was urinating on a stick until the stick started to move. It was a snake. I'd peed on a snake. Fortunately, the snake didn't bite me. I think the snake thought it was holy water. But that's not what I mean about being fearless. That's being heedless. But when you actually look, let's get serious now, what actually fear is. What fear is, it's looking into the future and seeing all the things which will go wrong. That's what fear is. And it's fascinating in human psychology, when we look at something, we always want to see the faults. We see what's wrong. Even in this beautiful new hall we have here. Now, this has just been built. It's the first time I've had the pleasure of sitting up here and giving a talk. How many people think, maybe the PA system should be better, maybe the seats should be more comfortable, maybe this. It's very easy to find the faults in things. And as human beings, we are great fault finders. We get married to a nice husband, and after a few weeks, we start seeing his faults. We get married to a beautiful, charming wife. After 2 or 3 years, we wonder why we married her. We sometimes see all the faults in people. And we see the faults in our job. What about the faults in our economy? Is the economy in Singapore going well? Now, if you're a fault finder, you think it could be going better. But really, we're living in a very wonderful age. Even in Singapore here, it's hard work, but we have jobs, we have houses, we have people caring for us. If we have gratitude, which is the opposite of fault finding, we can think, this is a very wonderful life we're living in here. You don't have people blowing up things in Singapore. Crime is very low. In some parts of the world, it's so dangerous. Here, you have a very good community, a good country. You should feel grateful for it. Many other parts of the world are nowhere near as wonderful as this. Somehow it's hard to feel gratitude. This is a true story. When I was in Thailand, people would come up to see my teacher, Ajahn Chah, to tell him their problems. Many people would have their problems. Maybe they lost their job, or maybe they had an argument with their wife, or maybe their children weren't doing well at school. And Ajahn Chah would talk to them. But this one day, a man came to see Ajahn Chah to tell his problem. That morning, his wife had picked some mushrooms for their lunch. She made a mistake. They were poison mushrooms. That morning, his wife and his 9 children had all died. His whole family had been destroyed in that one morning. When other people heard about that, the arguments with their wife, the problems with their children, felt like nothing. How can we become so fault-finding and petty when we see what real suffering is. Now, what I'm saying here is that why is it that people of our generation, of our age, of our time, we have so little gratitude and so feeling of thanks for actually being here and for having all the things which we can do these days? We always find fault. It's because of that same attitude. When we look at the future, we think of all the things which might go wrong. How about looking at all of the things which might go right? The organizers who made this hall available today, they may have thought, what would happen if only 10 or 20 people came? Sometimes you can get very upset and afraid. What would happen if you get afraid then? So instead of looking at what might go wrong, to overcome fear, we look at what might go right. One of the stories I like to tell was of a great English philosopher. This philosopher became world famous. In fact, a movie was made about him quite recently. That philosopher was named Winnie the Pooh. A little bear who your children read about and who make cartoons about. Many of you, I think, would remember that little fellow in English literature, Winnie the Pooh, who was always very smart. He always seemed to have an innate wisdom. Now, he had a friend who was very small called Piglet. Now, because Piglet was very small, like many small people, they were always very afraid. And in this particular story, Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were walking home through the forest. As they were walking home through the forest, a storm started to arise. The wind started to blow stronger and stronger, and they were still a long way from home. As the wind got more strong, first of all, little twigs came falling from the branches of the trees, and then bigger twigs, then whole branches came crashing down around them, and soon even big trees were uprooted and came thudding down onto the ground. It was dangerous. People can get killed by trees falling on top of them in storms. And poor little Piglet started to get very, very afraid. He got more and more afraid the more he thought about it, until he got so afraid he could go on no longer. He grabbed the hand, or should I say the paw, of Winnie the Pooh and said, "Pooh, Pooh, I can't go on any longer. I'm so afraid. What would happen if a tree fell when we were underneath it?" And that was a real possibility. For 1 second or two, even the great philosopher Winnie the Pooh was afraid as well. But then his wisdom, what we call in Buddhism his bear insight, started to come up. Bear, B-E-A-R. That was a joke, but never mind. It came to the fore, and instead of saying, what would happen if a tree fell when we were underneath it? Instead, he said, what would happen if a tree fell when we weren't underneath it? A different way of looking at it. But thinking of the positive possibility meant that fear was abandoned and they could walk on. And in fact, the possibilities were in their favor. It was more probable that trees don't fall on you when you're underneath it in a storm. Your chances are in your favor. So why do we always just focus on what might go wrong and think that that's the most possible? That is called fear. It's irrational, and it freezes our possibility of happiness and effectiveness in our life. Now, that was a story from English literature. We had a story like that in Singapore a year or two ago, which I mentioned in Mel Gill's program last night. A couple of years ago, I was invited here to give a series of talks, which at that time were going to be in Suntec City Auditorium. And just like the number of people here, I think they had about 2,000 seats, which the Buddhist Fellowship had to pay for. Over 5 days, when I arrived in the airport, there were heat-sensing cameras because this was the height of the SARS crisis. When I got out of the airport, I think the organizers told me, shall we continue or shall we cancel? You know why? Because at that time, all the government schools had been closed, and the government were discouraging people from coming to public gatherings in case the epidemic would spread. What should they do? They asked me for my advice. So I asked them, how many people had SARS? Actually, I already knew because I saw it on the paper on the plane coming over. In big black letters on the front page of the Straits Times was the figure 99. 99 people were confirmed with SARS at that time. So I asked them, what do you mean we shouldn't go ahead? How many people are there in Singapore? They said about 4 million. And I said, well, that means there's 3,999,901 haven't got SARS. No, it's just a different way of looking at it. And I said, well, look, that's a 40,000 to 1 chance you're not going to get SARS. The odds were in our favor. Not only that, but I told people, I told the organizers, when they come to one of Ajahn Brahm's talks, they laugh a lot. When you laugh, that's exercising your lungs. So it means it's stronger against respiratory system failures. You're actually exercising your respiratory system, so that must be good. Not only that, but when you laugh, that increases your immune response system. You actually strengthen your immune system. So I said, it's in the government's interest, it's in the nation's interest to come to one of Ajahn Brahm's talks and laugh. So they came, and they laughed. And not one of the people who came to my talks got SARS. There you are. Now the point is that we think, oh, a terrible thing is going to happen to me. We look at the future. It is actually irrational. We're not actually doing the calculations, doing the risk analysis, really understanding what the chances are of us actually coming to grief. Now, this is an important point right now because all the nations of our world are facing the threat of terrorism. And terrorism is creating fear in people, which is actually what the terrorists want. They want to disrupt people's lifestyles. But I read an article, I think it was one of the English papers, where they were concerned about a terrorist attack on London. And of course, as you know, the British government supported President Bush in the war in Iraq. And they're one of the chief targets for terrorist attacks, along with Australia as well. But I'm not afraid. I'll tell you why. In this article, someone suggested, well, if a terrorist wishes to attack London and create maximum damage, the easiest target, the softest target, would be one of the underground trains. Because so many millions of people use the underground, the London Metro, and they're packed during the rush hour. They would be very hard to stop. In a tunnel, an explosion has maximum damage, and they say that's a real threat. But the article went on to say that's no reason to stop using the underground when you go to work. Because this journalist did the calculations, did the figures, worked it out rationally, and found out that if one terrorist attack happened every year, obviously it'd be a terrible thing if it did, but if one train at rush hour was blown to smithereens and all those people died, still the number of casualties is much less than the number of people who die in car accidents on the way to work. Still, it's safer to go by public transport. The point is that because car accidents are just normal, because we don't really do the figures, because a terrorist attack is just more violent, immediate, tragic, we don't actually think of the other ways people die. They were proving that a lot of fear is irrational. Sometimes people are afraid of flying. But look at it. If you actually die on a terrorist attack on an aircraft, there are many advantages. First of all, because you die at, 10,000 feet, you're halfway to heaven already. And your family don't have to pay for the cremation. It's all done on the spot. No pain. And number three, you usually get an insurance payout. So why are we afraid sometimes of these things? Because we don't look upon it rationally. A lot of times it's because we see the worst possibility of what might happen to us. And it's fascinating also to understand when one does have fear, very often those things actually which we're afraid of happen. But before we say that, I told also in Mel Gill's program last night an interesting experience which showed how fear happens and how it is irrational. Because as a young monk when I was in Thailand, very often I'd be meditating out in the jungle, in the bush. You sit down in the very scary Thai jungle, sometimes at night. And at night was when the jungle animals would come out. And the jungle animals, even though it was a Buddhist country, the animals weren't Buddhist. If they saw a fat English monk, it's very rare you get foreign food in Thai jungles. So it was very dangerous meditating in those places. But you'd be careful. You'd sit and meditate and you close your eyes in the darkness of the jungle. Every now and again, you'd hear animals scurrying through the undergrowth of the jungle. They're usually only small animals, but every now and again, you'd hear a big one. And if it was coming towards you, you'd start to contemplate, what type of animal is that? So sometimes I'll be sitting there with my eyes closed. Instead of watching my breath, I start to think, is that a small animal or a big animal? And I would be very careful. I'll be very mindful. I'll be very scientific, I thought. And I listened. That wasn't a small animal. That was a big animal. I listened even more carefully. That was a huge animal. That was probably a tiger, a monk-eating tiger. And I'd be absolutely convinced that there was a big animal coming in my direction. And only then, out of self-preservation, I'd open my eyes. As soon as I opened my eyes, I'm ashamed to admit this, it was only a mouse. Not even a big mouse, a tiny mouse. It was strange. It was fear had amplified the sound. Because I was afraid, what was only a small, tiny sound became something huge. It had grown out of all proportion to reality. That is what fear does. As soon as you have fear, what you're hearing and what you're seeing becomes much worse than what's actually there. Angie said in my bio that one of the things I did when I was in Cambridge was I was a member of the Psychic Research Society. We hunted ghosts. As you all know, in places like England, they're famous for their ghosts. There's many ghosts there. not only in England, but also in Thailand. Because many of the monasteries where I stayed was where people took their dead to be cremated. Not only did they take the remains of the dead, the ghost came along as well. Many times there were strange things happened in that monastery. One particular night, it was the night of the dark moon, when there was no light in the sky. That particular day, there was a villager who had passed away the night before, so we cremated him in the monastery. That very day, his ashes were still warm, when, as was our custom, we would meditate all night in the main hall. In that monastery there were many monks, but there were also some young novice monks, some Thai novice monks. Now those Thai novices would usually sneak off back to their hut to have a sleep. They weren't supposed to. They're only little fellas. The problem was, to get from the hall to their huts, they had to walk through the dark jungle when the ghost was around. This poor little novice, even though he wanted to sleep, there's no way he was going to walk outside of that hall when there was still a fresh corpse on the fire. So, actually it's interesting about corpses. You know that when you actually cremate a corpse, you have to put it on its side? In these funerals which we did, the open funerals, you had to put it, because if you put it on its back when you burnt it, because of the way the heat dried out the muscles, very often the corpse, when it was lying down, would sit up. Not only would it sit up, just because of the ways the muscles would move, the hand would go up. I saw that a couple of times. It was very frightening, especially when it was pointing to you. That's some great stories over there. But on this particular occasion, there was a fresh corpse, a fresh funeral. And that poor novice, he could not force himself, even though he was dying to rest and going to go to sleep, to go back to his hut in case the ghost got him. But about 2 o'clock in the morning, it was not sleep which forced him out of that hall. He had to go to the toilet. And the toilet was about 50 meters. He built up his courage as the pressure built inside his bladder. And eventually, he made a dash for it. He ran to the toilets and locked himself in and relieved himself. Oh, that felt good. But he'd only been in that toilet a few seconds when he heard something walking towards him. That sound was so loud, he was sure it was the ghost. That sound came, it walked right up to his toilet cubicle and scratched the door, scratch, scratch, trying to get in. That novice stayed in that toilet for 3 hours before he would come out. When he came out, he told us, he said, I was in the toilet and the ghost came to get me. He was so frightened. But one of the other monks saw what had actually happened. They saw that ghost. It was what's called a civet cat. A civet cat every night would go into those toilets, the Asian toilets, to actually have a drink of water. There was only a little civet cat, a jungle cat was just coming in, just please let me in, I'm thirsty. But he thought it was a ghost. That's what fear does. Fear makes ghosts out of civet cats and makes people very, very afraid. We amplify the truth of things. So one of the first things to do is realize that we're not being rational, we're not being realistic, we're exaggerating what might happen. We're looking into the future, this might happen. A lot of times it does not happen at all. How many of you are afraid of losing your jobs? How many? the chances of you losing your jobs are much, much, much less than you think. But we keep on thinking, oh, what if I lose my job? What if I lose my job? What if I lose my job? The answer is, what if you don't lose your job? Which is far more likely. The trouble is, if we keep on thinking, what if I lose my job? What if I lose my job? We get so worried that our performance goes down, and then we do lose our job. It's a lot of times is when we get afraid, we bring those things which we're afraid of actually into existence. We almost make it happen. That's why when you're afraid, when you allow fear to come into your mind, you will discover that you're not being efficient, you're not being happy, you're not really doing your best, and you're actually bringing out what you're afraid of into existence. Some people are afraid of cancers. They get so afraid of getting a cancer, because there's lots of cancers around these days. They're so afraid that because of fear, they get stress, and because of stress, they get cancer. You can see you make it happen. One of my favorite quotes was of the American comic George Burns. He just passed away a year or two ago. But on his 96th birthday, I don't know if I should say this as a Buddhist, but I'm going to. He was drinking, he was smoking cigarettes, he was eating junk food, he was staying out late at night, doing all the things you're not supposed to do. And he was 96, for goodness sake. And so somebody came and asked him, he said, aren't you afraid of your lifestyle, what it's doing to your health? And he said, I'm not afraid, said George Burns. My wife was afraid, and she died 12 years ago. It's the fear is the killer. So understand what fear does to you. The more you are afraid, the more those things you fear actually happen. So that's why we see fear and we realized how it cripples us. So understanding is going to cripple you. You understand it's something you have to learn how to overcome. You have to find strategies so you overcome fear in your life. Rationality is one of those ways, but that's not enough. As a race of beings, sometimes we're addicted to fear. Basically, we like to be afraid. We like to worry about things. Which is why, if in your family you haven't got enough to worry about, you watch the TV. You watch Big Brother to worry about who's going to be evicted next. Or any other show, which is worrying about something you don't really need to worry. Haven't you got enough worries already? Some people even go to these horror movies, like Alien, or the Eastwick Witches, or something else to scare the socks off you. Haven't you got enough fear already? I know some young people go to these adventure worlds. They do extreme sports. Or they go and pay good money to go in these death drops where you fall from a couple of 100 feet and miraculously you stop before you kill yourself. Amnesty International would call that torture, but people actually pay money for that. To be frightened. Why do we watch ghost movies? I actually read in a newspaper that one of the TV companies here in Singapore actually asked people to write in their favorite ghost stories. Whether they were real or they weren't real, they acted them out on TV, and it was one of the most popular TV shows. I don't know why I'm talking this talk, because you want to be afraid. Now, why is it we like to have fear? One of the reasons is because we're afraid to be at peace. We'd rather have this fear of worrying ourselves and filling our minds with something to be afraid of than to worry about. It's an addiction because we do not know what peace is, what happiness is, what freedom is. Some years ago, I read this story, and it really makes this very clear what I mean. There was this Harvard professor who got evicted from Harvard because he was taking drugs. He was one of the early hippies. he went to India, found a guru, and he decided to use meditation and like Eastern philosophy instead of following drugs. His name was Ram Dass. He went to the United States and was one of the first people who was introducing Eastern philosophy to that country. At this particular time, that one of his students, a young girl, told him about her father who had this terrible disease. He was in hospital, and no matter what the hospital did, he was in constant pain. He was in agony. So she asked her guru, can you please come into the hospital to see if you can help my father? He's in agony, and the doctors don't know why they can't help him. Maybe you can do some mumbo-jumbo to help him. So he agreed. Now this man, Ram Dass, he was dressed like some Indian sadhu come hippie with beads and long hair and a big beard. He was weird. And so when he went into this hospital ward, when the father of his disciples saw him, straight away he said, "Get that freak out of my room. I don't want no Hindu Eastern weirdo coming into my bedroom." And so he wouldn't even listen to this fellow, Ram Dass. But he wanted to talk to his daughter. His daughter was visiting him. So he started talking to his daughter, and as they were talking together, this fellow Ram Dass decided, I'll give this man a foot massage. He didn't have anything else to do at the time, so he started massaging this American man's feet. For the first time in many weeks, the pain went away. For the first time in so long, all that agony disappeared. This man's response was, "Get away from my feet, you freak." He actually ordered this American Hindu-type holy man to stop what he was doing. He'd rather have the pain, the agony, than have his understanding challenged. He'd rather have pain than confusion. It's funny that sometimes we'd rather be afraid of things and worry about things than have the peace of freedom. That is one of the fundamental reasons why no matter what I say, no matter what people say, no matter how rational and reasonable it is, we will always have fear when we want something to do, something to fill our minds, something to escape into, which is why that people watch scary movies, which is why that people worry about their family, why they worry about things they don't need to worry about, why they see the very worst in what might happen, just to scare themselves silly because you like being scared. I suggested this evening that during this talk on fear, at this time we could turn off all the lights, and that I could invite some of my ghost friends in to scare you. If I did that, actually you think, what a wonderful talk this is. People actually go to haunted houses, because they love being scared. Now, can you understand what I'm talking about there? How we love being scared? Which is why that after a while, as human beings, we start to appreciate other things than just fear. Instead of actually feeling fear, we start to appreciate like peace, happiness, freedom in our world. This is why actually as Buddhists we learn a bit of meditation. When you meditate, when you have a bit of peace in your heart, you find that fear can't come up. It's a strange phenomena. When you appreciate peace, fear hasn't got a way of getting into the mind. It's because we are distracted, because we're not happy where we are, because we want to go somewhere else, we go into our old habitual escape into fear. We like being afraid because we don't know anything else. The monk who ordained me, who is now one of the chief monks in Thailand, Somdet Buddhajan in Wat Saket, he's looking after the job of Sangaraja at the moment. He told me that once he was meditating as a very young monk, and when he came out of his meditation, he found a snake on his lap, a very dangerous snake. He said he never felt any fear at all. He said it was strange. There was a dangerous snake sitting on his lap, could have bit him so easily and killed him, he felt no fear at all. When you're at peace, fear can't come. So by learning a little bit of meditation, learning a little bit of peace in one's life, you'll find your propensity to fear gets less and less and less. And then it's not because you're stupid that you don't react, it's because you're peaceful that you don't react with fear. I found that very useful many, many times. When there was times when I really should have been afraid, but I wasn't. On one particular occasion, there was a man who, it's a strange story. He was an Irish man who actually had come to our Buddhist center in Perth looking for work. He was a pest exterminator. He would spray the houses to get rid of termites and other creepy crawlies. So when he knocked on the door of our temple, he says, "No, can I exterminate any of your pests?" And the monk who was there said, "No, we're Buddhists, we don't exterminate pests. We live at peace with them." And he thought that was really weird and strange, so he started talking. And the monk started explaining about Buddhists respect animals, respect even small creatures, and that's why we don't exterminate pests. Even if the pest happens to be your husband, you don't exterminate him. And so he was so impressed, he started coming to the talks, the lectures, and he soon became a Buddhist. He changed his job. But unfortunately, one day, when he was repairing the roof of his house, he fell off the roof, hit his head, and went a bit crazy. He actually had some brain damage. He started dressing up as Elvis Presley, and actually looking like Elvis Presley. And he came to see me once. He was crazy. He was psychotic. He had a walking stick, and he tried to hit me over the head. He swung the big heavy stick, and it missed my head by an inch. But I knew that he wasn't trying to hit me. He was trying to scare me. And I refused to be afraid. Because I was a meditator, I could still be at peace. Didn't really matter, if he hit my head. So what? I've had many heads in my many lives. I can always get another one in my next birth. It wasn't a particularly pretty one anyway, so maybe get a better one next time. Because I wasn't afraid, that he kept on swinging that thing and swearing at me until he calmed down. And from that time on, I was the only one who could understand him and calm him down. He trusted me from that time on. So I became the person who could calm him down when he had psychotic episodes. It was only unfortunate that one time he had another psychotic episode. I had the flu at the time. His wife rang up my monastery. I just was unable to go. I was bedridden. The next day he committed suicide. It's not very unfortunate, but that happened. I could only help him because I was fearless. Another time, another true story, I was coming back from Sri Lanka via Singapore, and I arrived at Perth Airport. At that time, the customs were very, very strong, not on looking for bombs, but looking for drugs. So as I lined up at the immigration counter, there's long queues, they took a sniffer dog up and down the lines, trying to find out if anyone was importing drugs. You may have seen those sniffer dogs at Singapore airport or other airports of the world. They come up and down the lines, they sniff you, and then they go on to the next person. And even if you're not carrying any drugs, I notice this with people, as soon as they pass by, everyone has a sigh of relief. But when that dog came to me and sniffed me, it didn't go on. It buried its muzzle in my robe, wagged its tail ferociously, and would not go. And the customs officer had to actually pull it away, yank it forcibly. When that happened, the people in front of me took a step further away. Those behind me took a step backwards. They weren't with this monk. And everybody was looking at me. But I wasn't afraid. I wasn't carrying any drugs. So I was just quite happy there, waiting my turn for the immigration counter to check my passport. True story, they decided to take that dog round a second time. And I was much closer to the counter now. Up and down it went, past everybody, sniffed them once, went down to the next one. When it came to me, same thing happened. Buried its muzzle in my robe, wagged its tail ferociously, and you could hardly pull the dog away. Oh, was I in trouble. As soon as I got through immigration, "Come over here," they said. And they took me to the counter. Now, one good thing about being a monk, you haven't got many possessions. So it's very easy to open up my bowl or my bag. There was nothing there. Instead of a strip search, my robes are so loose I can just open them up, see, nothing there. So then they said, "Where's the drugs?" I said, "I haven't got any drugs, I'm a monk." And they said, "Well, why did that dog sniff you 2 times? Why did it stay with you? You must have drugs somewhere." I said, "No, look, monks are compassionate. That dog felt my compassion, and that's why he stayed and wagged its tail." And I said, "If that's not the reason, that dog was probably a monk in his last life, and that's why he came through." And the customs officer said, "Get out of here." Now, I survived that because I wasn't at all afraid. If you're afraid, you find you get into a lot of trouble in life, no matter what happens. So, because I was peaceful, because I had no livelihood, I kept my precepts, I had nothing to be afraid of. What are you afraid of? Are you afraid of ghosts? I know from all the research of the Psychic Research Society in London, when I was a student, it had been going 100 years. Now it must be 135 years it's been going. Never once has a ghost hurt anybody, except in the movies. It can make you afraid, but it can't damage you. That's why the next time you see a ghost, do not be afraid. If a ghost comes to see you, you have the great good fortune of meeting a ghost. Take the opportunity. Get out a pad and paper and do an interview, an in-depth interview of a ghost. No one has done that yet. The Straits Times will put it in their front page because there's many things that everyone would like to know about ghosts. Do ghosts get married and have little baby ghosts? What do they do during the daytime? Because they only come out at night. Do they go and sleep? Where do they sleep? Do they have little homes in little ghost towns or something? Do ghosts believe in religion? Do the Christian ghosts get along with the Buddhist ghosts? Now, imagine you could actually do an in-depth interview with a ghost, get all this information. It'd be wonderful to publish. I'm sure you get a lot of money that way. So next time you see a ghost, don't get afraid. This is your chance of a lifetime to make a lot of money. You can even ask the ghost for a lottery number, because ghosts are supposed to do that, you know. So why be afraid? You've got a great opportunity there. So the point is that when we're afraid, we lose so many opportunities. So we know it's wrong. First of all, make yourself at peaceful. Number 2, know you've got nothing to lose. In fact, when you are afraid, you've got more to lose. So when you realize you have nothing to lose in life, so what? So you lose your job. You can always get another one. I promise you, if you lose your job, I can find you a job. As a monk. As a nun. And they can do something good in your life. Good job. So the point being here is, you don't really need to be afraid. Being afraid is seeing all the things which could go wrong. A lot of times that when these things actually do happen, I've already said if you do see a ghost, you don't need to be afraid. If you do get the cancer, I've worked a lot with people who have had cancers. So many have told me that's the best thing which ever happened to them. It's like a kick up the backside. Really, so they understand the meaning of life and how important it is to have other values than just having materialism, fame, and all the things which people strive for in life. You get something like a cancer, and your whole priority system changes. You understand about what's important in life. Friendships, your spiritual life, kindness, compassion, all of those great things of life which all religions celebrate, you realize that's what's important. Some people need those very heavy teachings to understand what's important. So you don't need to be afraid of cancers. Sometimes they can be your best teachers. When I was at school, the teachers who were the most strict, the ones I didn't like, they were the ones I learned the most from. The soft teachers I didn't learn so much from. They were fun to be with, but it was the hard teachers I learned from. In life, isn't that the same? The teachers, the experiences which are difficult, that's where you grow from. When you step in dog poo on the way to this temple, dog poo stinks and is smelly and it's terrible to have on your shoes or your feet. But you can take it home and dig it in under your mango tree. And when your mango has fruits, always remember that what you're tasting is the dog poo. What was once smelly is now fragrant and sweet, and you eat it. In life, what you're afraid of, what you thought was terrible, is actually fertilizer for your compassion, for your wisdom, for your spiritual growth, making you a better, sweeter, more tasty person. When you understand that, why am I afraid of these things? These things are just fertilizer for my heart. So instead of being afraid, we say, bring it on. Give me more dog poo for my life. Because we can make use of it. Then we're not afraid. One thing which I found in my life as a monk, whatever happens to me, I can always make use of. Anything you can make use of. Why be afraid? If I get injured, I can always make use of that. I can have a rest. If I get sick, I have an opportunity for people to make merit by giving me medicines. Whatever happens, I can always make good use of it. So the future is uncertain. I know I can adapt to whatever comes my way. Therefore, why be afraid? If this talk is not well received tonight, I was not afraid of whether you liked this talk or you didn't like this talk this evening. I'm not afraid at all. If you didn't like this talk, great. I can have a rest tomorrow. No one will come. If you like the talk, great. I'm doing some service for other people. Whatever happens, it's great. So why be afraid? Because one of the great fears which people have, an underlying fear, is the fear of what other people think about you. That's one of the reasons why very few monks would actually come up here and tell jokes in public, why they would come up here for an hour or more, teach, because they're afraid, what do other people think of me? I don't care what other people think of me. I'm just having a good time myself. If you like it, that's fine. If you don't, tough luck. And that is actually how that I faced fear of giving public talks. I decided to enjoy myself. Even if it's old stories I've told many times, I like hearing them. Like the story of the person when they're only 16. Young people, they're really concerned what other people think of them. That's why young women, young men, they have to dress up. They have to have the latest fashions. Even they have to have the latest way of speaking, so they're hip. Young people are always very concerned what other people think of them. When you get to your 30s and 40s, you get what's called self-confidence. You couldn't give a damn what other people think of you. When you're in your 60s, you finally discover that people weren't thinking about you anyway. They're thinking about themselves. So why worry? Why be afraid what other people think of them? Think of me, because you're thinking about themselves, most people. So why worry about what other people think about you? You know that English people are famous for being eccentric? I read about an English person who lives on the roof of his house. This is in North England where it rains and it's cold. He lives on the roof. He's got a house. He doesn't live inside. He lives on the roof, for goodness sake. And he's in such good health. He's not afraid at all what other people think of him. And he's probably going to live to a long age. Doctors know that the eccentrics who don't care what other people think about them, they wear really weird clothes, just like me, or they have weird hairstyles. They just do what, they're not hurting anybody else. Eccentric people have good health. It's true. Ask any doctor. The research has been done. The reason is because they're not worried what other people think of them. How many people are worried what other people think of you? Your new hairstyle, your clothes, your car, whatever. Oh, come on, give yourself a break. Just enjoy yourself. No matter what other people think about you, that's their problem. But the point is, if you do relax, you don't care what other people think about you, not only are you healthy, you have a long life, but also you're happy. You're not worried, you're not taking the burden of other people's opinions on your shoulders. So that's when you're not afraid anymore. And you can really enjoy yourself, you can be eccentric. I think the Singapore government wants more people to be eccentric in Singapore. So this is the classes of eccentricity. Ajahn Brahm's eccentricity seminar. Learning how to be a little bit strange. It's strange coming from a monk. The monk is teaching you how to live life on the edge. So this is actually how to overcome fear. Enjoy yourself. Don't worry what other people think about you. Create peace in your heart, joy and happiness. Because happiness and fear, they can't live at the same time. One last story, I told this morning. One last story. When I started meditating, because there's a few meditators here. When I started meditating, after 1 or 2 years, I got a vision in my meditation. The vision, which I saw clearly, I had my eyes closed, was of a demon coming to attack me. This demon had big, bulging red eyes. It had skulls around its head for hair. It had fangs for teeth. It was scowling, and the teeth were dripping blood. It looked frightening. I saw that in my meditation. Do you think I got afraid? No, not me. I realized that that was a creation of my mind, so I could play with my creation. When I was in school, I used to get into a lot of trouble. When there's a picture in the book, I would doodle. Where there was eyes, I'd put sunglasses on it. I'd black out teeth. I got in a lot of trouble for that. But that's what I did with my demon. I blacked out a few of its fangs. I put sunglasses over its bulging red eyes. And I put a straw hat on its head of skulls with a flower. Until that demon looked so ridiculous that I laughed and that demon never came back again. There's nothing which upsets demons most of all than a sense of humor. If you laughed at a ghost, any self-respecting ghost will be so ashamed it will run away. Now you understand how to overcome fear. Laugh at fear. When you laugh at fear, fear and happiness just cannot coexist. And with that laughter, you become fearless. Peace, laughter, being rational, realizing the odds are in your favor, understanding it's much better to be at peace than actually to indulge in the obsession. You realizing you don't need to be afraid, don't want to be afraid. It's a terrible state to be in. And whatever happens, you can always do something with it. So why be afraid of this wonderful thing we call the unfolding future? It would be terrible if you could predict the future. Life would not be worth living anymore if you could know what's going to happen next. Isn't it wonderful that you're living life not knowing where it's going to go, enjoying every moment, enjoying the journey, the adventure we call our life? Don't be afraid of it, because then you're sacrificing the enjoyment, the happiness, the mystery, the wisdom, the chance for compassion, and the chance for growth. Let go of predicting the future so you can be free to enjoy the present. Don't be afraid of what's going to happen next. Otherwise, you won't be able to enjoy what is happening now. Please let go of fear, and then you can actually be free and you can be happy. And whatever happens, you can just take it and life becomes fun. You're free to be happy. So that's the talk today on fear and how to overcome it. Very good. Now to see how much you've understood, we get questions. Now don't be afraid to ask a question. If you have one in your mind, just ask it. Don't worry what other people think about you, because they're not thinking about you at all.
That's right. Thank you very much, Ajahn Brahm, for that very enlightening talk. And as Ajahn Brahm said, let's see how much you've understood the talk. Please come forward to the microphone and ask your question. And this is your opportunity to have many of your questions answered. And also it's perhaps a question that other people too want to ask.
Ajahn, are they real ghosts or are they our mental formations?
Aha. There are some ghosts which are mental formations. There is one of the other ghosts, one of the most real ghosts in the world, the most dangerous ghost in the world, which I think everyone will agree is real. The ghost which creates so much harm in our world, which can even kill people, that ghost is real. And I go around the world warning people about the ghost which actually has already killed many, many hundreds of people. It's called the bottle ghost. The bottle ghost makes people crazy. The bottle ghost can actually take over a person's mind. The bottle ghost can actually kill someone. The bottle ghost is called alcohol. As soon as you open the lid or the bottle top, the alcohol can possess you. That's why we call it possessed by the bottle ghost, killed by the bottle ghost. But there are actually real ghosts around. There are real other beings. They're very rare to see, and they are not like in the movies. If you see a real ghost, sometimes you don't know the difference between a real ghost and a person. For many people, they look the same. There may be even the person sitting next to you now. And suddenly, I'll tell this ghost story. This is actually one of the best ghost stories in Australia. It's a fascinating, true story. There's a couple getting married. Usually the bride comes to the church late. She was late, but the groom, her husband-to-be, still hadn't arrived. And she was getting, as you can imagine, at your marriage day, she was getting very, very nervous. Had she been stood up? But after about 20 minutes, finally the car came, and her groom, her boyfriend now, her future husband, arrived. He'd been in a car accident, and he looked very, very bruised and cut. And when she saw him, she said, "Let's get you to a hospital." And he said, No, I want to do this marriage. And even though the other people said, "Look, you should go to a hospital, you look really badly injured," he said, "No, I'm okay, let's go through the marriage." So they went through the marriage service. And after they were married, the two of them got in the car together, with the wife driving, to go to the reception, followed by all the other cars. The car with the bride and groom in it went over a rise in the hill. They were in front. When the other cars came, it was parked by the side of the road with the wife screaming. What had happened was her new husband just vanished into thin air. While she was sitting next to him, he disappeared. And she was beside herself. She parked the car and was crying and screaming. He's just disappeared. Later they found out the reason why he was late. He was in an accident, and he'd been killed in that accident. at the spot where that car stopped. The ghost had been so wanting to get married that the ghost went to church, and it was the wife who married a ghost. Strange story, isn't it? Good one, though. Can tell all your friends that tomorrow.
Just gave me some goose pimples. Renanda, please.
Yes, go on.
Ajahn Brahm, it's said that fear stands for false evidence appears real. False evidence appears real.
That's very good. False evidence appears real. That's very good.
In Buddha's life, there were many instances where situations arose when people came to kill him, tried to murder him, and so on. How did he overcome it for the sake of his audience? I'm asking those questions.
Okay,
I'll appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
When sometimes the Buddha, because of jealousy, people came to kill the Buddha? And how did he overcome the fear when someone's coming to kill you? I was going to tell this story, but I decided not to. Now I will tell it. When, in our centre in Perth, when we moved to our present centre from a smaller centre, we decided to have a big opening ceremony. At that opening ceremony, we decided to invite the Governor of Western Australia, Sir Gordon Reid. We didn't think he would come because we were a very small group at that time, and we were so pleased to receive a letter back saying he will come with his wife. It was my job. I'm a working monk, not just talking, but I do a lot of work as well. Yeah. I was given the job to hire the marquee and the chairs for the occasion. I rang up a firm in Perth, which was the best firm I could find, who hired out the marquees and chairs for the multi-millionaire garden parties in Perth. I told the lady that I wanted the very best. The treasurer of our society said it doesn't matter how much it costs, this is our big event, get the best. I told the manager we wanted the best, she understood, but on Friday afternoon when the truck came to deliver our chairs and marquee, I was busy helping someone else. I never saw them unload or erect the marquee. When I came round, the truck was gone, and that marquee was filthy. But we could get a hose out and wash it down. The chairs were also filthy, but many of my wonderful volunteers got out rags, damp rags, to wipe them down, cleaning up about 200 or 300 chairs. But when it came down to the chairs we had for the VIPs, like you've got these wonderful chairs in the front here, for the VIPs. We had 10 chairs for the governor and his wife and a few politicians and important people coming. Not one of those chairs had legs the same length. They all rocked. And that was too much for me. So I ran to the phone. I rang up the manager just before she finished for the weekend. I caught her as she was leaving the office. And I told her, remember I said we wanted the very best? Okay, the marquee is now washed, the chairs are being wiped down, but we can't have chairs which rock. What would happen if the governor of Western Australia fell off during the ceremony? She understood, she apologized, she said all the chairs will be changed within the hour. I said thank you, and this time I waited. When the truck came, what I didn't realize, that in Australia, people finish work on a Friday about 4 or 5 o'clock, and then they go to the pub to start their weekend drinking. The workers had been in the pub for quite a long time already. When their boss came and said, stop drinking, get back to work, the Buddhists need some more chairs. You can imagine they weren't very happy about these Buddhists. And I saw they weren't happy because when the truck came down our road, it was still traveling at considerable speed when one of the men jumped out and with his fist clenched came running towards me. Where's the bloke in charge? I want the bloke in charge. He was red-eyed like one of these monsters you see in the movies. He was drunk and he wanted a fight. So I went up to him and said, I'm the bloke in charge. And he put his fist 1 inch in front of my nose. His eyes were glaring at mine. And because of all the alcohol in his breath, that's the most alcohol I'd imbibed in all my years as a monk, just from his breath. But because I didn't have fear, he could not touch me. It was a wonderful experience actually to know that when you don't have fear, the person who is about to hit you cannot move. In order to have a fight, you have to show either arrogance or fear for him to actually to punch you. I was showing neither. At that time, all my so-called friends just watched instead of coming to help me. They did. That's what friends are like. They didn't need to help me because I had him under my control. I understood the answer to your question. When you don't show fear, people can't follow through with violence. They need to actually it's psychology. The psychology of violence has to be one cue, one response, another response, till there's a fight. Have you seen sumo wrestling? Before they actually get to do anything, they have to square up to each other, do this, do that, before they can actually fight each other. Even in any fight, we have to have this, actions which precede the actual fight. And when you break that psychology of action-response, by not giving the usual response, you've got a fist in front of your nose, but you're not afraid, that person can't go further and hit you. When there's fearlessness, no one can harm you. So that's actually what happens. Even when there's a story in the newspapers that there was this lady in Australia, she got out of a boat and she was walking to the shore through the surf. And people were screaming at her because the water was full of crocodiles, or rather alligators, saltwater crocodiles, which eat people in Australia. She was completely unaware of the danger, completely unafraid, and she walked right through without being hurt at all. That's what happens sometimes. When you're fearless, even animals, they just can't harm you.
Yes, please.
Hi,
Yeah, go on.
I just want to know how to live without fear for your children.
How to live without fear with your children. They're not your children. You got a little person there. They came into your life. Where did they come from? It's interesting, like some years ago, you know that after the Berlin Wall came down, and when Eastern Europe managed actually to come into the West for the first time, that in Eastern Europe that they had so few things. So there's a story of one of these people from Eastern Europe went to a supermarket for the first time. They'd never seen so many goods on sale. They saw this like mashed potato powder, just add water and you get mashed potato. You get like noodles, just add water and you get noodles. What I was really impressed with, you saw baby powder, just add water. You got that one wrong. But anyway, but where does your baby come from? It doesn't come from baby powder. I can let you know that for sure. The person who's come into your life has come from a previous place. And many mothers tell me they understand that. A being has come, that's an old being. It's not the same as you. It's not the same as your husband. It looks like you. It may have the same body, the same genes, but its personality, its character are sometimes so different. So please understand, whenever you have a child, it's not your child. It's some being who's entrusted to you for so many years. You look after them, you care for them, and eventually you have to let them go. That way, that a lot of the problems and troubles of looking after children disappear. It's not your child. It's a being entrusted into your care for so many years. Then you're not afraid of what might happen. In fact, you're real about what might happen. See this cup here? This cup can break. It's fragile. Because it's fragile, That's why I care for it. I don't drop it, I don't throw it around. Your child is like this cup. It is fragile. One day it will break, or rather your relationship will break. The child will leave you, you will leave your child. We come together for a while, we part for a while. But because they're not always going to be with you, that's why you care. When you go beyond fearlessness and come to truth, the fact it's not my child, they won't always be here, we enjoy the time we have together. When we're afraid, we can never enjoy anything. And through fearlessness, that's when we truly care. Because all that is mine, beloved and pleasing, all our loved ones, all our friends, will sometimes be separated from us. Because they aren't always going to be here. That is why we care. If they're always going to be here, we wouldn't need to. If this cup was indestructible, I wouldn't need to care for it.
If you want the talk, if you want more on how to look after your children, there is a special talk on that called Helping Children Overcome Difficulties that will be given by Ajahn Brahm on the 5th of June at the Buddhist Lodge. And if you happen to have a lot of guilt in whatever you do, there's a talk on living without guilt on the 6th of June. So do pick up one of these programs for the June talks and you'll be more enlightened. Okay, may I have your questions? And we'll then take one more question and then we'll have to close for the evening because Ajahn Brahm arrived this morning at 6:30 on an overnight flight and I think we should let him rest. And
Okay.
Many of you also has to go to work.
I got two questions.
I was
Okay,
afraid you were going to say that. Go on.
First question, how should we overcome insecurity in our heart?
Okay.
Second question, is there such thing, destiny and fate in our life?
I knew you had to say that question. Is there destiny and fate in your life? Now, first question about insecurities. A lot of times insecurity is when we think we have something to lose. And that's why we feel we're insecure. Sometimes that when we want security, do you really want security in your life? If you really want security in your life, really you want death. That's the only time when nothing changes for you. So life is like this. It is insecure. We don't know what's going to happen next, and that's what makes life interesting. I was told of, I'm not quite sure, of an Arabic curse. This is a curse which they used to use in Arab countries some years ago. May you get whatever you want immediately. That was a curse. Think about it. May you get whatever you want immediately. What would be the purpose of life if everything you want, you attained it immediately? You'd have no striving, you'd have no effort, you'd have no struggle, you'd have no reason for compassion, for wisdom. Life would lose its meaning. If life was secure, life would be intolerable. There'd be no learning, there'd be no growth, there'd be no compassion, there'd be no wisdom necessary. Look at it. Imagine an absolutely secure world. Sometimes that such a thing cannot exist. What my teacher Ajahn Chah would say, it's like having a duck and wanting it to be a chicken. If you have a duck and wanting it to be a chicken, you're asking for trouble. You're asking for a headache. The world is like this. The world is insecure. The world is confusing. The world doesn't always go the way we want it to. That is the way of the world. Once we learn to accept that, to live with that, to be at peace with that, then we're actually learning what wisdom and compassion is all about. Compassion is to say, world, with all of the uncertainty of the future, the door of my heart's open to that. I can be at peace with life's uncertainty. And in fact, I can rejoice in life's uncertainty. I can appreciate that and use it as my vehicle for growth for wonder, for wisdom, for compassion. And I don't want the world to be certain. It can't be. It never will be, never has been. So I move my mind to fit the reality of the world rather than trying to change the world to fit what I want it to be. When I do that, you always become adaptable. There's always something you can do with what happens next. The wise person will always be able to make something out of what comes your way. Dog poo becomes fertilizer. Sicknesses become an opportunity for growing in compassion and wisdom. Deaths become an opportunity for wisdom, for moving forward into life. Old things must move aside for new things to grow. And we're part of all of this. And we can be at peace. We can even rejoice in being part of this thing we call life. We become secure with insecurity. We become at peace with confusion. That's part of our life. Life is confusion. You can't expect a chicken to be a duck. If you want life to be something different, you're like the man who has a chicken and wants it to be a duck. Do you understand? The second part of the question was, is there such a thing as fate? No, because there's always something you can do with what you've got. No matter what you're dealt with in life. I gave this story today at Manjushri School. Because some of the students were complaining about there's not air conditioning in the classrooms, there's not this, there's not that. It doesn't matter what you've got to work with, the resources of the school, the resources of the teachers. It's what you're doing with that which is most important. And I use the simile in karma of the two people baking a cake. I've used this before, but it's a powerful simile. Two people baking a cake, one person's got terrible ingredients. They've got old flour, old sugar, they've got butter full of cholesterol and hard fruit. Terrible ingredients. The other person's got the very best ingredients, brown whole wheat flour, no genetically modified crops in 100 miles of where it's grown, canola oil, which is supposed to be free of cholesterol, beautiful fruit and honey. Two people, one with the best ingredients, one with the worst ingredients. Who makes the best cake? It's not always the person with the best ingredients, is it? Because sometimes it's not just the ingredients which you have to deal with. That's fate. What you're dealt with in life is your ingredients. Sometimes the person with the worst ingredients, because of what they put into their baking, they make the most beautiful cake. It's not what life has dealt you up to now. It's how you all put it together. What you do with what you've got. I've seen that so many times. Sometimes people, they're born disabled. Terrible things happen to them in their life. But my goodness, they make use of that and they become wonderful, great people. I just mentioned like Nelson Mandela, 27 years in jail. Look what he did with that experience. Became a great man, so kind, so compassionate. On the opposite side, one of my best friends at school who won a scholarship to study medicine in Cambridge. We went up to Cambridge University together. His parents were very wonderful, very supportive. While he was at Cambridge, he became a heroin addict. He wrecked his whole life. He had a glittering career in medicine where he could help so many people, and he ended up an addict. That was someone with the very best of ingredients who couldn't bake it together into a good cake. It's not what you're given in life, it's how you make use of it. And you can always make a beautiful cake out of even the worst of ingredients, because I've seen people do that. So fate, yeah, there's something is fate there, what you've got to deal with in life, that's your karma from the past. But what is most important is what you're doing with that now. So stop complaining about, oh, I've lost my job, oh, I've had an accident, oh, I've got no money. Get in there and bake a good cake out of it. Stop complaining, get in there and do something. And you can always make a good cake out of even the worst of ingredients. Those are 2 questions. Hope you're satisfied, because that's all you're getting. Okay, yeah.
Good evening, Ajahn Brahm.
Good evening. Is that your question?
That's not a question, that's a greeting.
Okay.
Okay, I have 3 questions.
Go on, Susan.
Trust that you answer them. First one is, I have a colleague who told me that actually he's a big birdie man. He says that his wife was never afraid of him despite his size. But his wife is very afraid of cockroach. So for people who have phobia like cockroaches or heights or what, the fear is very real. So how do one overcome this fear?
If you have a fear of cockroach, then adopt a cockroach. Sometimes we've got to face our fears and look at the poor little cockroach. It doesn't ask for much in life, just to run around your kitchen and have a bit of a play sometimes. So I don't know actually why we're afraid of those little animals. Sometimes when we get closer to animals, and actually when we appreciate that they're also afraid of death, they're afraid of pain, they don't ask for much in life. When we appreciate them, when we get close to them, we overcome our fear. We overcome our fear through knowledge, through meeting those things we're afraid of, through facing them, and through familiarity. There's many people I was afraid of in the past. I was afraid of people of other religions, of other genders, of people of other sexual preferences. Because I used to be afraid of homosexuals when I was young. I thought that was really weird and strange, because I was a heterosexual, and there was something about them. I thought, oh, that's really strange. I was afraid, and it took me many years actually to get to know that whether you're heterosexual or homosexual, you're just still wonderful people. You're wonderful animals. When you respect beings, then you don't get afraid of them anymore. You respect spiders, respect snakes. As I was saying, every one of those beings is important in the ecostructure of a forest. And the cockroaches are also important. Our world would be an unbalanced place without them. That's why they're welcome. So you can say to those cockroaches, "Cockroaches, I welcome you, as long as you go next door." That's what we used to do with our snails. In our garden, in our little city centre, we used to collect the snails very carefully and throw them over the garden fence next door.
Okay, my second question is...
Okay, in the interest of time, just one more question, and then you got 3 more nights to ask more questions.
I can combine 2 and 3. Okay. Does fear, I do think that fear have a place in our society. Take, for example, like caning, capital punishment. Aren't they good for the good of the society as a deterrent? And I combine it with that of children. Like for some difficult children, not my children, does fear help in their upbringing? Thank you.
Okay, yeah. That's a very good question, because I read a very wonderful report about capital punishment. It was actually a debate which was held in the House of Lords in London, a very good debate. And part of what they were saying, they were reported on a survey which was done over 100 years ago in Bristol jail, at a time when Britain still had capital punishment in public hangings. And they found about the 120 people who had been condemned to death by public hanging in that jail, some 90% of them had themselves witnessed a public hanging. And the conclusion was that they'd seen other people being hung. It was no deterrent to them. Much murders, those crimes which usually entail capital punishment, people do them for reasons where they're not really considering the consequences of their actions. They're motivated by anger, by jealousy, or whatever, and they're not thinking clearly enough for the deterrent effect to work. In many cases, deterrents don't work. Even the deterrent of actually, I was surprised at this, the first time I went to Malaysia, or even Singapore, there's a death penalty for people who import drugs. And I thought, my goodness, why would anybody import drugs into such countries? People still do. It's not a deterrent. The reason is because people think they're not going to get caught. It's the same way why people actually speed past speed cameras. It's the same that when I was at school, sure that if you got into trouble, you get the cane. All that did for me was to make sure that not I didn't get into trouble, make sure I never got caught. It just made me very, very careful and skillful. Whenever I got into mischief, it was always when the teacher wasn't around. So I never really learned why I shouldn't be bad. I didn't realize why I shouldn't, do mischief. So the fear of getting caught, it wasn't really helping me understand why I should be a good person. Instead of that, we have in Buddhism the fear of the karmic consequences of our actions. That is a wholesome fear. It's not that we might get caught, because it's not the country which punishes us. As I mentioned before, that if you do anything which is harmful or hurtful to another person, if you're a Buddhist, you know it's bad karma, and that will rebound onto you. If you get caught or not, stealing or lying or cheating, even if you don't get caught by the government, karma will get you. If you're not a Buddhist, if you're a Christian, then God will get you. If you're a Muslim, Allah will sort it out. And if you don't believe any of that, if you're an atheist, then you know you'll have to go into psychotherapy for years to deal with that guilt. Whatever you do, that you don't get away with anything. So it's actually the fear of the karmic consequences inside of you. The fear, I've done something wrong and I can't live with myself. I feel upset about myself. A very powerful story about that was about a year ago. A man this is one of my friends. He used to be a president of our Buddhist society, Dennis Shepherd. He was also a president of the Samaritan Society, a group of people who once a month stay up all night by a telephone. If anyone is suicidal, they can ring these people and get some good counseling for free. This particular night, he received a call from an English-sounding man in Perth, Western Australia, who was about to commit suicide. He couldn't stand himself. He had so much pain and suffering inside of him, he could hardly stand it any longer. This was his last hope of ringing up the Samaritans. Because that man was the inventor of the cluster bomb. With a group of other scientists, he invented this bomb, which he'd just seen on the news broadcast from Iraq, and what that had done to men, women, and children. He described the cluster bomb to this friend of mine in Perth. If that fell on the National Stadium of Singapore, he said it's strawberry jam. Everybody gets mashed to a pulp. He had invented that. Imagine how he felt seeing what had happened. That guy had suffering which I can't imagine. The karmic consequences of your actions, developing a bomb. Oh, that's really heavy karma. We should fear the consequences of our actions. We should fear harming other beings. We should fear harming ourselves. Those are fears which the Buddha said are guardians of the world. They're good ones.
Thank you for that. This is the absolute final question for the night.
Okay.
Hello. Yeah, I only got one question.
You're very compassionate.
Good evening. I think fear arises from uncertainty. Recently, I'm offered a job to work with schizophrenic patients, but I do have a lot of fear in accepting the job. Firstly, I have a very bad encounter before with mentally ill patients, and secondly, after talking to the previous worker who have left the job, she told me a lot about the management being demanding and strict, and this drives more fear into me. I'm currently very comfortable with the present job, but this opportunity to work with mentally ill patients is something I hope to do. Please advise on whether I should accept the job.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, I will never advise you to accept the job or not, otherwise you'd come and blame me afterwards. But what I'll do is I'll give you advice on how to make your own decision. Now, it is wrong for any of you to make decisions for somebody else, to say this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do. But the job of any friend or teacher or guide is to help you make your own decision and support you after you've made that decision. So, like, fear is not a good way to make any decision. The Buddha called that one of the agatis, one of the reasons why you shouldn't make a decision, out of fear. Get all the information you possibly can. Be honest to your abilities, what you can do, what you can't do. This is not being fear, this is being reasonable. Just to check out the management, because you'll have to live with them. And if there are a management which you cannot really deal with, you don't feel comfortable with, then that's not a really good thing for you to do. Wait for another opportunity where there's a better management. So you're not acting out of fear. Out of fear means that you're making an irrational decision. You're not getting all the information. As you said before, it's, something against the experience of reality or something. Fantasy. It's not really real. So get all the information, make a calm decision. If that decision isn't making itself, just wait, give yourself time. What I do when there's a decision to be made, I put all the information into my mind. I get as much information as possible, what I should do, what might happen, what might not happen, what I'm capable of doing, what I'm not capable of doing. And then once all the information is in my brain, I wait. And it's only 1 or 2 days at most, an answer comes up, and I'm comfortable with that answer. It feels right, and I always follow that. I never am hasty. If I'm not sure, I'll leave it. Wait for the time for the mind to process the information and make your own decision. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ajahn Brahm. You can see why we are all so inspired by Ajahn Brahm's talks. This is so enlightening. And with that, let's put our hands together to dedicate the merits before you clap. Hang on. I would like to dedicate the merits of having heard this wonderful Dhamma to the practice of our meditation and as well our mindfulness to ensure that we develop ourselves to be beneficial sentient beings and to gain enlightenment for the benefit of all. May we also dedicate the merits to Ajahn Brahm for his good health and reasonably long life, because he doesn't really want a long, long one.
Correct.
So that he will be able to continue to teach the Dhamma to one and all. And may we all wish you all well and happy, and may you always be guided by the Triple Gem. Thank you. And with that, please give a round of applause to Ajahn Brahm.
Thank you.